Hello friends, I am Nisha Sharma, Associate Professor, Department of English. Today we are going to discuss John Milton's sonnet on his having arrived at the age of 23 or on his 23rd birthday's critical analysis. Milton is regarded as one of the greatest and most influential English poets, ranking with Chaucer and Shakespeare. He wrote both poetry and prose, and in poetry wrote pastoral elegy, epic, drama, sonnet, and other kinds of verse. His most famous and influential work is the epic Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained, which has been at the center of English literary criticism since Milton's day. And now a summary of Milton's poem. Poems that are not given titles by their writers, such as this one by Milton, tend to be identified by their first line. About 50 years after Milton's death, however, this poem was dubbed on his having arrived at the age of 23. This title was immediately popular and has endured, even if some scholars of Milton wonder whether, in saying that time has stolen his 3 and 20th year, Milton is actually saying that he is commemorating in this poem his 24th and not his 23rd birthday. In this case, what has been stolen is not really his 23rd year of life, but rather that year's which begins with the poet already at the age of 23. Milton opens the poem by describing time as a winged thief, one who has stolen his 3 and 20th year, playing with a theme that is still common today. The sense that time often passes too quickly. Not only has his 23rd birthday arrived too quickly for Milton, but winged time shows no signs of slowing down. His hasting days fly on with full career. In this phrase, career takes an archaic meaning indicating high velocity. Although the days of Milton's life speed by, young Milton tells the reader that he is not sure what he has to show for himself with the line, "But my late spring no bud or blossom should." Milton's mention of late spring is a reference to the season of life he considers himself to be in. Still in early adulthood, he is not yet in the summer of his life. But there are not for him many more days of springtime. Although spring usually brings with it the signs of the summer to come in the form of buds and blossoms that will yield summer flowers and fruit, Milton says that his life as yet shows no such concrete potential, no buds or blossom from which to guess the shape of things to come, or even prove that he may ever be fruitful. There might be several reasons for this. Milton goes on to say, it could be simply that he does not look as old as he actually is. Perhaps my semblance might deceive the truth, that I to manhood am arrived so near. But the lack of outward proof of his maturity is not just an illusion, Milton admits. In fact, he finds his entire character still not as mature as other people of his age, a fact that he describes by continuing his blossom metaphor and comparing himself to unripe fruit. And inward ripeness doth much less appear, that some more timely happy spirit endure. In the next lines, however, Milton softens his judgment of himself with hope for the future. Throughout the poem, Milton achieves a delicate balance in the age old tension between free will and predestination. But he is also aware that the forces that will shape his character and his destiny are finally in God's hands, not his own. Even as he finds a measure of peace through his argument for belief in the providence of God, he acknowledges that he must still act well within the circumstances time and heaven give him. that he must have the grace to use it. So, now the analysis. This poem wastes no time in setting up who our speaker's perceived antagonist is. In the first two lines, he characterizes time as a winged thief of use that has stolen the speaker's adolescence before he could make anything of himself. Calling time a thief suggests that Milton does not blame himself for his lack of advancement in his 23 years of life. He avoids castigating himself by placing blame on an uncontrollable force. It is much easier to find fault outside of oneself, especially if the thing supposedly at fault is an abstract concept such as time. In the following lines, Milton emphasizes the speed with which he feels time has passed by describing his days as hasting and full. Hasting certainly implies speed, although it implies purpose. A person is told to make haste when they are needed somewhere. Similarly, full may imply that his days are busy, leaving little empty time between tasks. It seems that the time he felt pass has not been passed idly, but rather with hard work and toil. These lines may be referring to the years he had already spent studying at Christ College, Cambridge, where he was still enrolled when he wrote this. Perhaps he felt that many years had been wasted studying and learning about other people's work rather than making his own. In line 4, the poet introduces a metaphor in which he uses the seasonal cycle to symbolize the various stages in life. Within this metaphor, spring symbolizes youth, summer is the prime of life, autumn is middle age, and winter is old age or death. He characterizes his own stage in life as late spring. In continuation of his seasonal metaphor, Milton states that no bud or blossom has grown in his late spring. In other words, he believes he has nothing to show for it thus far, and furthermore implies that he does not see good prospects for the summer of his life. After all, if there are no buds or blossoms in spring, then how can there be beautiful full flowers in the summer? In lines 5 through 7, the poet recognizes that his semblance may make him seem very into others, although he inwardly feels that he is living the time of his youth. In lines 8 through 10, Milton begins to change his attitude towards the passage of time by surrendering his lot or fate to the will of God, a power he considers to be higher than that of time. These lines mark a clear shift in the speaker's thinking. In the last three lines of the poem, Milton completely surrenders his worry about success to the will of heaven. Interestingly, although his outlook is more positive in some aspects than his opening attitude, he is still using a scapegoat to avoid taking responsibility for his station in life. In the beginning, he blames time for stealing away his youth, displacing responsibility, and in the end, he displaces responsibility again by surrendering his fate to the great taskmaster's eye, which is to say, he believes he has no say in what task God will assign him. Although on his having arrived at the age of 23 is profoundly interesting given Milton's historical context, Milton's true genius is revealed in the fact that even if he had never become the towering literary figure he did, the poem would stand alone as a universal document of human experience. To modern readers looking back, Milton's poem may seem almost prophetic. No generation of readers since has been able to ignore Milton. His work has been widely reprinted and read, and in every century since his death. And many critics place him secondary only to Shakespeare among English poets. Even his prose works continue to affect the destinies of humanity long after his death. Now, themes. First is crisis of faith. The crisis created by Milton's awareness of the passage of time is that one that can be resolved by the poet's choice to put his future in God's hands. In the first eight lines of the poem, Milton worries that time has passed too quickly. He has been at Cambridge studying, but he has had little time to fulfill what he sees as his destiny. Milton is aware he is a talented poet, but instead of writing poetry, he has been studying. In the final 6 lines of the sonnet, Milton acknowledges that time, whether soon or slow, will still inevitably lead him to God. This is the same future that all men will face, however may not hurry. Time will lead Milton to God if he can accept the limitations of earthly time. In these final lines, Milton finds the answer to his problem in giving control over his life to God, and as a result, his crisis of faith is resolved. Next is journey. Milton uses this sonnet to symbolize the poet's journey from doubt to self discovery. He feels guilty about his time spent studying when he has not published anything. He is slow to mature. As he nears age 24, the poet feels he is at the border between youth and manhood, a time to which he has arrived so near. He worries that when he reaches maturity, his talent may be less rather than more. Although worried, he is confident in his own abilities, and so the sonnet moves the poet from the hesitance and questioning of youth to the realization that perhaps he will achieve all he wishes. There are contradictions and uncertainties, all of which indicate that the journey will not always be clear. Ultimately, the poet feels the journey will bring him success. His intent is to please God and use his abilities as best he can. The journey is to reaffirm the poet's faith in God and to find his place in the world. Next is Passage of Time. Milton's sonnet explores the idea of time as a guide to his destiny. Milton calls time the subtle thief of life because time steals without awareness. The sonnet is written sometime after Milton's 23rd birthday, and already the poet is thinking about the approach of his 24th birthday. He sees the way in which time steals the days away from him, and he is not even aware of each day passing. The poet notes how he has planned to accomplish so many things, yet instead feels he has spent too much time studying and learning. In lines 5 through 8, the poet suggests that time can deceive others since he still appears to be young, but Milton knows the truth that time has stolen his youth. In the final 6 lines of the poem, Milton changes direction and the sestet responds to the problem expressed in the octave. Time which steals his youth is also bringing him closer to God. This religious interpretation of time expresses the Renaissance notion that the passage of time will bring mankind closer to a final meeting with God. Milton justifies his use of time because, regardless of how he spends it, in the end, time is on his side, bringing him closer to his God. Predestination and free will. This poem makes clear that Milton is incorporating both Calvinist ideas of predestination and the Anglican Church's emphasis on free will into his poem. The poem's octave, the first 8 lines, focuses on the problem of free will. Milton has chosen his course of study, and as a result, he has neglected his own talent, his poetry. In the poem's state, Milton moves towards resolution, which he finds in embracing both the Calvinist idea of predestination and the Anglican promise of free will. He can reconcile his wasted youth if he gives the choice to God. His youth has not been wasted since it moves from closer to God. This is the will of heaven. At the same time, the next line, if I have grace to use it so, takes the poem back to the free will. His talents will grow and develop if Milton chooses to do so. Now, style. In its form, on his having arrived at the age of 23 is an Italian sonnet, also known as a Petrarchan sonnet, written like most sonnets in iambic pentameter. Its thematic organization closely follows the structure of the form with two well-developed movements corresponding to the 8 lines octave and the 6 line sestet. The octave follows the conventional Petrarchan rhyme scheme of ABVA, ABVA, while the sestet rhymes CD, 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 EE, one of several conventional patterns. The beginning of the sestet, where the rhyme scheme change, is known as the turn of the sonnet because at this point an Italian sonnet's theme or tone usually shifts. In the case of on his 23rd birthday at the age of 23, the transitional but signals a change from the impatient arrogance of the octave into the humbler prayer of the sister. As a sonnet, what this type of two-part sonnet encourages are poetic meditation that first introduce or set up a problem in the octave and then dissolve or reflect upon the problems in the system. This problem resolution structure allowed Milton to address different topics than love in his sonnets, as in this poem. What on his having arrived at the age of 23 considers specifically is the problem of the poet's belated creative maturity. Milton already knew by this time that he wished to be a great writer, and his problem is that he is growing older, but he still has not produced the sort and amount of work that might be expected of one with such ambitions. My hasting days fly on with full career, but my late spring no bud of bosom should. In these lines, Milton complains that his years are advancing, but he has little to show for them. No real bud or blossom is in evidence. Milton's poem exemplifies the problem solution organization of the octave sonnet form. Moving on from the matter of his outward appearance, Milton returns in the octave's next lines to the problem of his professional belatedness. He points to some more timely happy spirits. Critics suggest that Milton had in mind close friends who, like himself, had chosen writing as their profession, but who, unlike Milton, had already published substantially by their early 20s. The sestet and final extra line of Milton's sonnet solves a problem put forth in the octave by reconceiving time and ambition. Milton subordinates his own individual ambition to God's will in the sestet, and he substitutes God's eternal time for mortal human time. Milton has thus decided by the end of this poem that his own ambitions are secondary to God's plans for him, that he will submit to God's will, and that in submitting to God's will in this way, he no longer feels keenly the possibility of any personal disappointment. Milton's regret over his advancing age and belated development pales in significance once the rule and time of heaven and God is considered. Milton in the octave is worried, ambitious young man who is comparing himself to friends and wondering whether he will produce the creative work he so desires to compose. In the sestet, to the contrary, youthful worry and ambition dissolves as God's will is embraced. This attitude of acceptance comes about because Milton in the sestet is not conceiving of himself as an individual, but rather as a sovereign and subject of the Christian Almighty God. What he as an individual wants, he realizes, might not be what God has in store for him. Regardless of his own wishes, his progress is determined ultimately in strictest measure by the Almighty. His lot will be that which God decides, and whether it is mean or high, he will embrace it as the will of heaven. The mix of Christian humility and proud individualism in this poem is characterized of much of Milton's writing, including his last work. And it says a great deal about both the nature of Milton's religiosity and of Christian belief in general at the time. Thank you.